great to see everyone, and thanks for the attention. In the next, I think, 15 to 20 minutes, I'll try to shed some brief light on some of the proactive strategies that Mugo also mentioned in the introduction. So how can we make sure that we get from reactive to proactive, and how can we prevent losses before they happen? I have a presentation which I see here, and you now also see here. That's good. So yeah, and that's basically a very important subject because as we all know, the costs have been rising exponentially, not only due to inflation, but also just in general because healthcare is getting more and more expensive, and people are spending a lot more on healthcare. And it's a challenge to insurers to make sure that the costs are under control, especially in a competitive market like Kenya, where there is, at least 15 good health insurance companies and a lot more hospitals who can actually sort of like put pressure on prices. So as a result of that, it's very important to manage cost and to really understand the risk of insurance and health insurance. I will focus on health insurance today because that's basically our focus, and how we can prevent costs from occurring. Good cost, which is like real healthcare cost, and bad cost, which is like cost from fraud or sort of like unnecessary administration cost, and really catastrophic, unexpected costs, for instance, from data leaks or things that can go wrong. So that's what I will try to do today. So I suggest as an agenda that I just do a super tiny quick recap of what MTBA is and what we do and what we stand for. Because over the years, we've had many faces and many different activities. So, I'm very well aware that it can be confusing. So I'll take a minute to recap that. And then I'll try to shed some light through 3 case examples on how we can try to be as an industry more proactive rather than reactive. So the first one is ensuring that data security and privacy compliance is embedded from the onset in the way we deal with data. It was already mentioned by a lady in the Q&A panel about how do we make sure that ethics and sensitive data are captured well and treated in the right way. So yeah, there's some tricks and tips which we think we've seen that we can share and that we can as an industry perhaps learn from. Secondly, it's about preventing fraud and waste. So how do we make sure that those premiums that are paid are actually being used for the real things that are needed, and that they are not being used to be defrauded or wasted. And then thirdly, how do we make sure that a lot of my colleagues earlier today spoke about the ability how real-time data can actually make a lot more insights possible, and that we also can control risk and cost a lot better with real-time data. Or mostly today we spoke about data, and I think what we will try to show is that we also can have, with the technology of today, you can actually have access to real-time data, which makes it possible to be ahead of the curve and dashboards. So I'll share a bit more about that. So very briefly about MTBA. What is MTBA? So MTBA is a Kenyan digital platform that facilitates an end-to-end underwriting policy and claims journey based on high-quality data centered around the member. Now, that's a long answer, but actually what it is, we're a digital platform which connects insurers with hospitals and members, and we do that with very high quality data because we realize, that data quality is the most important thing to be able to operate an insurance business or a hospital, and also to engage your members. We heard a lot of examples today about, like how technology can make sure that the member engagement is more active, how insurers can use data to, to control cost. Julius shared some examples, but what is really driving us is essentially that all that data is available, but it's a bit static, so the whole project that was highlighted takes some time to collect the data, to look at it, to derive insights. It's a whole undertaking. And I think we believe with the online technologies that are there these days, that shouldn't have to be the case. It can actually be real time, it can be low effort, so that human brain cells can be used to do something with that data rather than compiling the data and making sure that the data makes sense. So that's what we focus on. And for us, the member centricity is extremely important because that's how we communicate with the member. We do that through the mobile phone. Well, it's no secret that our logo, MTBA, looks a lot like M-Pesa. That's because we are also part of the Safaricom family. So we are sort of like, we have a partnership with Safaricom, and originally we're born out of the M-Pesa Foundation. So there's two main activities that we do. Number one is that we license out that platform to insurers or TPAs or other fund managers. And the second is that we use our own platform to provide those administration services to insurers. So you can either choose and use our license, or you can essentially ask us to use the platform on your behalf, which means that we can do tech-enabled administration services in the background so that insurers and underwriters can focus on making the best products, selling them to the clients, and engaging with their customers and focusing on underwriting risk. And then we can take care of the administration in the background. Originally, we started off as a dedicated mobile savings wallet. So just like you have your M-Pesa wallet, you also have your MTIBA wallet. We signed up a couple of million people on that in especially 2016, 17, 18. But then in 2019, we started to pivot towards insurance-based models. I don't have to preach to the converted, but insurance is, of course, the answer to risk pooling. Julius gave us a good lesson in how it came into existence. And if you save for yourself, you will never be able to care for catastrophic events. But if we do risk pooling, then essentially we can together be strong against unforeseen expenditure. And as MTIBA, we want to make an effort and play our part in making sure that more people on this earth are financially resilient when it comes to meeting their healthcare expenditure. So that's why in 2019, we pivoted from savings-based wallets to insurance-based models. And we started to work with insurance companies to take care of their digital needs. And so in essence, there's three main components. Number one is that members access their benefit on their phone. Number two is that hospitals submit the claim information digitally with super high granularity of data quality on the platform. And then thirdly is that insurers, or we on behalf of them, use our platform to pay the hospitals. This thing that we do it on their behalf, we call TPA, third-party administration. And so we're a digital TPA as well for insurance companies. Last thing is that we are known under different brands in various geographies. It was already confusing with the announcement of me. So globally, our company is called CarePay. In Kenya, our company is called MTIBA, because that's where we're from. That's how we came into existence. And we're also active in the Middle East, in Dubai, and the Greater Gulf region. And there we are known under the brand Aspire. But in the end, it's all the same. It's the CarePay platform, which was born and bred in Kenya, and which we're now exporting to the world to make sure that more people and more insurance companies can use our platform. So that about MTIBA. You can ask me anything about it later. That's my job. But let's now spend some time on something more interesting maybe. So example number one is ensuring that data security and privacy compliance is safeguarded. Earlier today, my colleagues already spoke about cyber threats and cybersecurity. And it's something that is not going away. It's going to be there. Hackers will become more innovative, especially when it's clear that you can earn a lot of money from it or do damage to companies if you do bad things. So it means that we as CIOs and technology fanatics need to think through differently on how do we make sure that whatever we have is intrinsically data privacy compliant. Last year, we had the implementation of the Data Protection Act in Kenya. Globally, it's a hot topic. And so that's why we've thought about how to make sure that data security measures are embedded by design in technology. So one example of that is that, and it also builds a little bit to the ethics question, is that we are using our platform. We are not storing any personal identifiable information on our platform. We do, but in a specific PII, so personal identifier information, PII, in a PII data vault, which means that in a specific vault, a digital vault, there is registered that I am Peter and that my membership number is 32948, and that I'm this much, this old, I'm older than you think, and that I have this gender and I have these kids and things like that. In our main database, we don't store that information. It's tokenized. So it's basically like a random generated code, which means that anyone who gets access to our database, justified or in an unfortunate case, unjustified, they just have a blur of information with unrecognizable tokenized numbers. It's only that you can connect it to the actual name and the actual PII if you have an authorized role to collect that data from the PII vault, from the member information vault. And every time that is being retrieved, it's actually a two-way API with a lock. So we can always see who has had access, exactly on which moment of time, by whom, in which circumstances, has known or seen that the person knows that this is the particular name. Which means that in case there is a data breach or a data leak, nowadays, like there is someone who has unauthorized access to your database. Has that person seen or used personal identifiable information? Very difficult to put your fingers on, because they have access to the database, so they have the table with the fields. So they in principle have, but whether they have used it or not, that's unclear. Whilst with this one, you actually, if there's a leak, the database is essentially a randomized set of tokenized numbers. But if someone breaches into this, then you actually have the audit trail of who retrieved what information. So that's in an unexpected security risk situation. In normal business practices, it's also very useful, because if I'm a claims assessor of a, let's say, Jubilee policy, and I'm assessing a claim about Peter, and I've seen that I have gone to the doctor and I didn't have a cold, but I had something much more personal. A claims assessor doesn't need to know that it's me as Peter who went into that particular hospital. Claims assessor needs to know that it's this membership number, for instance. And if I go twice or if I defraud the system, then the person of the claims assessor needs to know that this membership number goes twice. But the claim of, the claims assessor doesn't need to know that it's me, because it may very well be that I'm the neighbor of that claims assessor, and then it's actually quite, embarrassing maybe. So this is how you can also use role-based access, essentially. So any roles in our platform you can define. You can prescribe what kind of information they can see in a real field basis with PII, or the standard is basically tokenized. So a claims assessor just sees a very long string of unrecognizable characters in the name field because the person doesn't need to see it. So I'm just sharing this example. Well, this is a video. It's an audience that is tech heavy, but still I can say it's boring because it's basically in the back end where we demonstrate that this works. So I suggest I skip it. But in essence, what I would want to leave behind with us as an audience is that it's a mindset switch, and you don't have to use MTBA, it doesn't matter. Like any platform, just think by design, what kind of information needs to be known by whom and when, and how do we keep an audit trail of that, especially when it comes to sensitive personal information. And I think that can be good guiding design principles to build up your platform. Second example is preventing fraud and waste. So, lots of figures have been mentioned today, 40% of waste, fraud. We all know about it. And I think what we are doing essentially with the MTBA platform is to apply claim automation where it's possible. Someone recited the Data Protection Act. It's not only automation, that's true. So this diagram is quite complex. So the TikTok generation version, too long, didn't read. It's basically like a rule-based, and AI engines can assess claims with set confidence levels. And if it's okay, only if it's okay, then the claim is approved. If it's not okay, then essentially a human being needs to look at it. So there will not be a situation where a computer says not admitted to the hospital or claim not payable. There will only be a situation where computer says everything looks fine, let's pay. So it's important to keep that in mind, because you don't want to have a situation where the system has denied you access to healthcare services, because that will be very detrimental also for the trust into the platform and into what we do as insurers. So if you do this, then essentially it means that human capacity can be freed up to look at the fraudulent cases and the things which are more complex, where the computer basically is not confident enough. So we do that, and let's see if this video works. No. Try again. Yes, it goes. So this is an example of what a claims assessor who uses the MTBA platform sees. So the font type is a little bit low, but this is an example digital claim, which is very granular with the line items, the Panadol we were talking about, how many items at what price. So that means that, just as a side note, that later on data analysis about whether these prices are outliers or not is very easy, because intrinsically the data is in that granular fashion captured. the provider submits also a diagnosis and some payment details, etc. Then it moves on. So this is the provider who submitted the claim in that level of granularity. And then we switch to the view of the claims assessor. So this is a claims assessor who basically is going to assess the claim. The claim was not automatically processed because there was something that the engine didn't trust. And so these are two things, and it goes a bit fast. But what it is that the diagnosis didn't match the treatment combination. So essentially, diagnosis was malaria, and there are some drugs which relate to malaria, but there's also antibiotics which don't work with malaria. So basically, the system says, like, hey, claims assessor, please pay attention. It looks like this item is not justified. And it also highlights an item of which the price is totally an outlier for the peer group of this particular provider and location. And so with that, our claims assessors become a lot more effective in terms of processing claims, especially when it comes to outpatient, which means that they then can use their time and capacity to look at more complex fraud cases or inpatient cases. Whilst there's no value leakage, so to say. So let's see if that then works towards the next slide. I don't think it does. Could someone maybe move it to the next slide? It's maybe the video is creating an issue. Sorry? Yeah. It's not responding. Yeah, okay, there we are. That's great, because then our claims assessors or claims assessors who use this platform can then spend their time on dashboards like this. So I can tell you, in this day and age of granular data, there is no hiding if you're doing wrong things. So it's a little bit into the ethics discussion again. But if you're clearly doing wrong things, you should not be allowed to get away with it, because indirectly you're stealing from all of us who are honest. So what we have is a couple of dashboards which refresh on a daily basis every morning. And this is an example I wanted you to show. This is the top 10 members in this portfolio with repeat visits. And repeat visits we've defined as a visit with similar diagnosis in the last 30 days in a similar provider. It doesn't have to be the same provider. Actually, in practice, it's typically not the same provider. So these are our infamous clients who do what we call drug shopping. So they have one prescription and they go to 20 pharmacies and collect the same prescriptions medicines. They don't give the prescription away and they just move around and then stock their own pharmacy or basically sell it off through the back of their car or whatever. And there's no way to hide, because every morning we see this. And then what our sort of specialized claims assessors and case managers do is they look up what's happening here. Sometimes it's legitimate. If you have a wound and a dressing and you need to go back very many times, it can be legitimate. But in many cases, it's not. So, and this allows us to basically immediately act on it every morning. So, we all know about the fraud and we all have war stories about fraud, which is identified. But there's typically a common red thread, and that's that we only find out after the fact, when this person's cover is already lapsed, person has disappeared, we cannot find it. Every morning at 9 a.m., we know what's happening and we can follow up directly with the person. And that's the power of real-time analytics. And I think it's important to realize that these things are possible. Whether you use MTBA or not, it doesn't matter. But, with the technology we have these days, this is now possible, which means that we don't have to spend time on collecting and collating the data and then living after the fact. No, technology can help us bring these insights on a day-to-day basis so that our colleagues in the companies can focus on, arresting this fraud and making sure that service delivery is good. So some of the statistics, these kind of things make sure that the number of claims processed per day per claims assessor increases about 500%. Important, the time between processing a claim and payment of hospitals reduces by 96%, which means that if you think about it, like insurance is costly. Insurance is very costly, health insurance generally. And a big reason for that is that there's long cycles where hospitals are being paid late, because it just simply takes a lot of time to collect claim forms, to analyze them, to process them, to prepare payments. And that also with data is not needed. So you can compress the payment cycles if you use automatic assessment, automatic payments, if you don't have to wait for a physical claim form and those things. Which means that the hospital gets their money faster and that less working capital is required, and which means that better prices can be unlocked. And this is beneficial for everyone, except for maybe the banks. So maybe we have some banks in the audience here. But in the end, what we want to do is to make sure that healthcare is cheaper, that health insurance is cheaper, both in terms of healthcare cost as well as in administration cost. So we see the results. It's possible. This 10% loss ratio improvement is not a weird number. And we all know that in health insurance, it's a difference between being profitable or being loss-making. So just good to see what technology can make work. The last example I want to briefly touch on is how to reduce real risk. So we've talked about like bad risk, which is like, fraudulent claims and admin costs and whatever. But how do we reduce real risk through the use of granular real-time data analytics and digital care models? This is some screenshots of example dashboards which refresh on a daily basis. But some of the things which I always find very funny is that you can see this thing here, which is the daily value of claims. So we have a tendency as Kenyans to be less sick in the weekend, especially when we have employer-driven covers. So we tend to go to hospital during the week because it's just better use of time than in the weekend. And so you can see that very, very clearly, especially also in the Christmas season, when people are traveling. I'll delay that hospital visit until I'm back at work. So you can see that on a daily basis. That's a funny example, but what is the real value of it is that you also see on a very granular basis which people went to which providers at what cost. So you can actually sort of really inform your negotiations on a daily basis. Some of the things that Julius was also talking about, that we can do on a daily basis, because the data basically shows are costs rising, are certain hospitals having end of month targets, also very clear when the average cost per visit is going up. So you can actually really address that and arrest that in a real-time basis. The individual information you have about what happens, this is a screenshot of how, in COVID disease patterns, COVID-related disease patterns were rising earlier this year. So, there's been some news coverage about it, but the actually COVID-related diseases came up a bit. Not as strongly as in 2020 and 2021, but there was a new wave of a new strain of the virus. So you can actually see that in the data. And you can use that to also mitigate real-time, essentially, health-seeking behaviors. You can do preventative measures, education, you can steer people, you can suggest them, and it's on a policy basis, so it can be different for different regions and geographies or different corporates or whatever. So this data basically allows you to filter on a real-time basis to make sure that your population really gets healthier and that you help them prevent the losses. And lastly, I think it's also good to know that when you have this anonymized personal data, intrinsically embedded in your platform, you can actually link that information to other solution providers, because there's so much technological innovation is going so fast. It's very difficult for one company to do everything. Maybe the Googles, but even those, they can't. So they have to buy or to work together and partner with other partners who are specialized in their field. So for instance, we know in our ecosystem, we partner with an American reinsurer, and they have in their partner ecosystem a company which is only focused on summarizing inpatient bills, summary reports. So that's their core business. So you basically upload a PDF with 80 pages from, let's say, Nairobi Hospital, a discharge summary. And then this AI tool basically gives you a summarized view of what happened in that particular case, which then a case manager can use and sort of look at it. We will never be able to do that as Mtiba, no way. But what we can do essentially is make sure that our data is structured such that it's easy to integrate with some of the others who are specialized in this field. So this is what we do also when you look at like digital health providers like HealthX, Bionate, Antara, Zuri, Maidawa, many of them are either present or you might be familiar with. So our app essentially plugs into those. So they then can actually focus on what they do best, which is like digital health and preventive disease management, essentially. And it's possible and made possible through the availability of high quality anonymized data. So long story short, how do we move from reactive to proactive? How can we prevent losses before they happen? Some of the insights that we see is that, number one, I think really protect personal data by being intrinsically secure. So shift the mindset on how you think about personal data, because it's a fact, those cyber criminals will be there. They will get better. They will outsmart you. So you better be prepared in case it happens, that the damage is minimized, essentially. Secondly, outsmart fraudsters by using tech and human capacity where it's most valuable. So let the commoditized stuff for technology and use our people to really do, the difficult things so that we can act on what needs to be happen. Someone once mentioned, I don't have credit to this quote, but someone mentioned once, like, will AI replace people? And then that person said, like, no, AI will not replace people, but people with AI will replace people without AI. So I think that's good to think about it. Like, we need to work together with AI and then spend our time on things which are really valuable. And lastly, use data analytics and track-driven solution to really understand real-time risks and act on them immediately. I have some music starting, so I think time is up. Thanks.